leadership, right, is how do we lead ethically with those parameters, those upfront conversations, the ideas that we have in terms of, um, you know, agreements and expectations, that what do you think about that, Tiff, in terms of ethics and leadership?
Well, look at me thinking. Um, I think that number one for leaders, it's important to really understand the role of trendsetter. I I can't stress this enough. I've worked for leaders who expect ethical behavior but model none of it and say things on the outside and then behave in a completely different way. And that sets the tone for what everybody else will do. And so Brene Brown says it so eloquently. It's living your values, not just professing your values, or practicing your values, not just professing your values. So when it comes to leadership, especially in an employment perspective, we do make agreements with people. We say things like, come and work for our company. We're going to give you X amount of money for you to do these tasks. And this is what your job will entail. So for this amount of money and this amount of time off and these benefits, if you're lucky enough, and this, promise for the future, this is the job that you're going to do. And people agree to that and they come and they do work. And so ethically, I think that it's unfair to ask people to do more than what they're compensated for. So I love like the idea of hashtag act your wage, doing within the scope of what's expected for you in your payment plan, whatever it is. So this is not to say that people will go above and beyond and that there's not going to be maybe some extra duties every now and then when the company needs it. But I think ethical companies and ethical leaders do not exploit their labor. And so when we sit together and say, here's what I'm going to pay you and here's what you're going to do for that money, that employers should stick to that agreement, but also employees should also stick to that agreement. And so if you're agreeing to this amount of compensation for a job, then you have to do that job to the best of your ability within, again, the scope of your employment. So I think that's the ethical thing to do. And this includes time off. Like most of the time, sick time and vacation time is part of that compensation package. And so ethically giving employees the freedom to take the time off when they need it without guilt, without shame, without negative consequence, I think is equally important, but it's also uh, ethically important for employees to respect like the nature of their business and not abuse the time off, but take it when you need it, but also be cognizant of the impact to business. So, I mean, there's a lot of give and take here, reciprocity between these two ideas. Um, but I think it starts with leadership and what they model. Because if I come in and I'm a leader, and let's say the value that I profess is that we are dedicated, then I'm going to show that dedication not just to the work, but to my employees. I'm going to be showing that dedication to, what's the bottom line, and I'm going to be showing dedication to, again, fiscal responsibility, whatever it is that's important to me. I'm talking about it, but I'm showing it, and my employees will follow if I'm guiding them down the right path. I just think too often, a lot of time and effort and energy is put into like creating corporate vision statements and missions and values. And then it's just some cute poster in the lobby, but it's nothing that guides people's behavior. It's nothing that guides direction. It's just what we put out there of who we are, but it's not what we do. And that to me is highly, highly unethical. Highly unethical. Especially like human services, when we say things like we're here for service and collaboration and empowerment, as long as you don't make me do anything, as long as I get to make all the choices for you, and we do the opposite of what our values are, And the other part of it that I think is unfair and a bad leadership practice is to only talk about those values and what we do, why we do it when it's time for like performance evaluations or when it's time to like write somebody up. Like you're not exhibiting the value of service when I haven't heard about service since my last performance review, you know? If it's not part of the conversation regularly, how do you really hold me accountable for it if it's not guiding like our path? And so that to me is a real big consideration for leaders is in being an ethical leader. Again, are we creating organizational policies and legal guidelines with the mindset of this is who we are? Are we being fair in the way that they're applied and not just using them to punish people when we don't like the way they behave, but really, embracing that when people get it right, are they effective? Are they leading us to our goals? Are they leading us to, again, standing up for what's important to us as a community? Like those are things that I think about.
Yeah,
And I'm looking for hypocrisy. I'm looking. Can I tell you? I'm waiting to catch you slipping with hypocrisy because as soon as my leader fails, you've now signed a check for me to do what I want. Sorry.
no, I hear you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you know, there's something, I really believe I heard a while back and it just really stuck with me. You can't hold somebody accountable to something that they haven't already agreed to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're holding people, excuse me, you're holding people accountable to ideas in your head that you have not vocalized, verbalized, or um, or explicitly put down on paper, and then how could you expect them to hold themselves accountable to it? And that goes with vision and values and mission. You can, you know, have all the mission, vision, values that you want. If it's not visible and it's not regularly repeated in conversation, you can't expect everyone
Mhm.
to remember that, right?
Right.
Oh, it's in the code of ethics. You read that and signed that on the first day of your job. When else have we talked about any of this? When
Right.
else has this been part of my performance reviews, right? My regular check-ins with my manager, right? Or just anything else that lets me know what, if I'm living up to the expectations of my job, right?
Mhm.
That is such an important piece, right? It may be legal to hold somebody to an ethical standard and it's fair, but is it effective if you have not communicated it,
Right.
right? And you have not, lived or actually practiced towards those ethics. Otherwise, they're just pieces of paper, right?
Yep.
There's when you think of when you were talking about how other people are judged and evaluated, it made me think of the standard of your basic rights. Have and maybe you've seen this. It's something that was based off of the United Nations, Declaration of Human Rights, right? But this is something that I really believe is important, right? So you have rights as human beings, right? The right to be treated with respect, to say no and not feel guilty, the right to experience and express your own feelings, the right to take time to slow down and think, the right to change your mind, the right to ask for what you want, the right to do less than you're humanly capable of doing, the right to ask for information, the right to make mistakes, and the right to feel good about yourself. Just think about how often in your experience have you been in organizations where some of these are violated, or just even in
Mhm.
relationships, professional relationships, personal relationships, leadership relationships? Any of these stand out to you, Tiff, as things that um, are violated more often than we'd like to think?
The right to say no and not feel guilty. This one is huge, especially as people, especially human services, I'm sure it's happening everywhere, have been understaffed. And so people are expected to take on more and more and more responsibility. And sometimes this is leading them to being burnt out, to being overwhelmed, to losing their compassion and their empathy because they're just overworked and underappreciated. Um, and whenever I say start saying no, that is like a foreign concept. Can't say no. Like you can. What are they going to do? You know, they're going to fire you. They're already short staffed. This is not saying no to what you agreed to, but I am saying it. Sometimes you have to say, I don't have the bandwidth to take on this extra responsibility. And as much as I'd love to be helpful, I just can't do it. Or if you want me to say yes to this, whatever you're asking me to do, what are you taking off my plate? Because I can't do it all. So that one I think is huge. The right to say no and not feel guilty about it. Um, the other one, and this one actually, the two that I'm seeing here, the right to experience and express your feelings. I will say from a work perspective, you do have the right to experience and express your feelings. And at the same time, that doesn't always it's not a requirement that it changes anybody's mind. It's like one expectation I want. Like I can tell you what you're doing is disappointing me, but you're under no obligation necessarily to change what you're doing, but I can still have feelings about it. Um, and the right to change your mind. This one for leaders, oh my God. If I could like make one wish for 2025 is for leaders to be vulnerable enough to say, I used to think this, but I got new information, and here's what I think now. And to create that as like a norm in the workplace that just because I said that this is what it was 2 weeks ago, if I get new information, I'm allowed to change my mind and change my answer. And I don't think enough like it just I think in society in general, but like people dig their heels in to just be right instead of just saying, you know what, I didn't know it then, what I know now, and here's what I think differently, and it not be looked down upon by someone not being like consistent or maybe they're wishy-washy, but to just say, I'm allowed to change my mind with new information. Um, and that leads to the other one that really was important to me was the right to ask for information. I'm a person, I need to understand like the context of things, right? And so if you tell me something and it makes sense to me, I'm gonna go with it. If it makes sense, I I'll roll with the punches. But when it doesn't like make sense to me, I will start to ask questions like where is that coming from? Or what goal is this support? Or how is this going to help the people? You know, and I'm not asking those questions to make whoever the decision maker is feel like an idiot. I'm asking those questions because I generally need to understand the context to put it all together so I can be effective. And so people do, I love that the right to ask for information and to fill in the blanks. Leaders are, I mean, there's classes you could take on effective communication. You can find some of those at www.givingthegiftcoaching.com. What I'm also saying is, um, even if you are not a perfect communicator, even if you think you are the perfect communicator, people can read into anything. And what makes perfect sense to you may not resonate with somebody else. And so they have the right to ask for information. And so when people are asking questions, don't take that personal. It's not like the goal is not to stump the chump and make a fool out of you. It's, sometimes people need a bit more information. And I'm not a huge fan of like leadership secrets. I can't talk about that with you. Well, then why are we doing it? Why are you asking me to do it if we can't talk about it? Right. So if you can't be transparent with the decision-making process, then it's probably not the right thing to do. And I would say go back to the ethics. Is it legal? Is it fair? Is it effective? And if it's not meeting that criteria, it might not be the right thing to do. And so this is a great place for you to not just have people ask for information, but you also, as a leader, have to be open to asking people for information. Um, Nothing about me without me. Don't make decisions for me unless you're not talking to me about it, helping me understand my perspective, because your vantage point may be very limited. So those are the ones for me that stood out the mostest, the mostest,
The most is,
the
yeah, no,
mostest.
I hear
Yeah.
you. And I mean, I just go down the list, right? You know, if you do this well or if you don't do this well, right? If you treat people with respect, you build trust. If
Right.
you allow people to say no and not feel guilty, they feel supported, right? If you don't let people express their feelings, they're not going to feel supported,
Right.
right? And they're not going to know that you have their back. If you don't give people time to slow down and think, you're not going to get well thought out and a full range of decisions, right?
Right.
Brainstorming doesn't happen in that way. Introverts don't get heard, right? And
Hmm.
people feel like their opinions don't matter and you lose engagement. If people aren't
Yep.
allowed to change their mind, then we're never going to have a growth mindset. Uh,
Exactly.
Like you mentioned, our society, I'm so sick of these people that are in the public eye not being able to say, I thought I believed this 5 years ago and I realize now that I don't believe it,
Hmm.
right? Or that I believe something different, or that, what President Obama used to say, my ideas have evolved on gay marriage. Sure. So have mine.
Hmm.
From the time I was a kid
Hmm.
till now. They completely evolved. Do I get a chance to change my mind? Absolutely. And if you tell me I can't, then then there's a word before that, right? So,
Yeah.
just thinking we have the right to change our mind we have the right to get new information that enlightens us, that broadens our perspective. And if we don't use it, we are not an effective organization in terms of leadership, right? To do less than humanly capable,
Yeah.
you will burn people out in a minute. You'll burn people out and you will give them a feeling like I can't do enough for these people, right?
Hmm.
Um, I mean, my wife went to work day after Christmas. I think there were 6 people on the schedule, and it was her and the supervisor that were there. Everybody else called in sick, and she was by herself, lumping all the packages that were in this huge post office. And then the supervisor, 20 minutes before she was off, asked her to stay another hour. And my wife said, I can't. I have plans. I have a life, and I'm tired, my back hurt, and I'm doing the job of 3 people. And the supervisor had, kind of was upset at her rather than the other 4 people who didn't show up, right? And maybe she was mad at the other people who didn't show up, but she did not let my wife know, I'm not mad at you. I'm just frustrated this whole thing. I understand you worked your tail off. Thank you. I wish you could stay a bit. If you can't, I get it. This is a bigger issue than there's one person saying I can't stay. Those other 4 people who call off when they want to, you know, you're going to get rid of the good people, right? And
Hmm.
so you don't feel supported. If you can't ask for information, you will not always know your motivation, right? We talked about motivation. It's the why. Why are we doing this? Why are we, getting this done? What's the benefit for us? How is this going to help us? If we're not told that, our brain will immediately go to resistance, right?
Hmm.
Um, and to make mistakes, we have to grow, we have to get better. We don't get better by doing things exactly correct. We just stay at that point. It keeps us safe. Rather than taking 10 minutes to do a function, we do it in a half an hour because we know that we get it done correctly. Where maybe if we try some ways to get it done quicker, we might learn to get to that 10 minutes. We'll always stay in a safe place so we don't get in trouble. I'll do exactly what's asked of me and nothing more. Right. And the right to feel good about yourself. Am I in the right place? Do I feel like what I'm doing is something that I can do and continuously do and feel like, I'm providing a positive benefit to my organization, to my unit, to my team, to my family, and to myself. Right. It's so
Right.
important, and if we're not able to do that, then you know, that's why we have so many disgruntled folks who, are disengaged. 70% of people are disengaged or actively disengaged. It's because they've checked out because one of these things are being infringed.
Right.
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 So I think it's so important to think about that as a leader. What is it that you communicate to your team and how do you communicate it? Right. And then how do you reinforce it? How often do you reinforce it? What's the frequency of you living up to those things that you say you want people to do?
Yeah. Yeah. I was listening to you when you were talking about the rethinking and people being able to again rethink their perspective or their values. Um, we're talking about ethics today, and I honestly truly believe that this is one of those unethical behaviors is not rethinking what what you believe, like not having the right to change your mind or utilizing the right to change your mind when given new information. You know, working in government, one of the most frustrating things for me personally, and where I will immediately disengage, like you lose all credibility with me if I say, "What, why do we do it this way?" And the answer is, this is the way we've always done it. And there's no, you've lost me, right? Again, I want it to make sense, and I'm not combative. I'm not a person who makes trouble for the sake of making trouble. I really like the path of least resistance. I just want to understand. And so when again we're doing things a certain way and nobody can explain why or how we do it that way, it's just the way it's always been done. I I don't love that. It's triggering for me for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so um if leaders are not willing to rethink, they're not effective and ethical leaders. Honestly, truly. You know, I see waste in government with people holding on to the old ways. Like one of the examples, I'll give a human services example here, is manual budgets. Okay. Do I think it's important for people to understand the concept of how benefits are calculated? 1000%. You should understand how budgets work. You should understand what information goes where and how it's calculated. But in the reality of 2025, no one, with the exception of maybe a small few specialized workers who maybe do overpayments or over issuances, are not doing manual budgets. Period. Period. You're not doing them. Because even if I do a manual budget, before I can issue any benefits, it still has to go back into the system. So I'm not doing manual budgets. And so so much time is lost and wasted on training people how to do something that they'll probably never do. To me, is it effective? It's not effective. It's not a good use of resources. It's also not fair because for people who can't do math, and I say this with all the love in my heart, but there's like a real frustration that comes from trying to understand something and then I get it and then I never use it ever again. Like, what was the point? What was the point?
Yeah.
And so, again, rethinking, and there's a really good book, Think Again by Adam Grant. I have a little professional crush on Adam Grant. I think we've talked about this before. So, Adam, if you're out there,
I know he's your bae.
once I meet Armando today and start building up my celebrity repertoire here, Adam, I'm coming for you next. Um, but it was a really great book, and gave some really good insight into the idea of thinking again, which again, from an ethical perspective, this is something that coaches and leaders and human services professionals all need to keep into consideration that the way we've always done it may not be the way that it needs to be done. And being able to be open to new information, be open to new skill sets, be open to what other people have to say. Like I can't ever get comfortable in my coaching skill set because if once I do, I'm not probably not going to be an effective coach. I can get familiar, but as soon as I get familiar, that probably means there's a better way of doing it. Once I'm feeling super comfortable, that probably means I need to expand my skill set a bit because again, part of me being an effective coach is that I utilize the most effective coaching process. I'm going to utilize the most effective research-based, evidence-based practices that are going to make me a good coach. And if I'm not open to that, well, I've coached like this for 20 years. Am I really being ethical? I'm not giving people the most value for what they're paying if I'm not up to date. It's like a surgeon I'm going to go to a surgeon, but they haven't learned any new surgery techniques since 1964. Well, a couple of things might have changed since then that would make you more effective. So just because it works doesn't mean it's the most effective approach. And this is one of the things I think, again, coaches, leaders, and government officials need to consider. How do we change our mind?
Yeah.
Not about our values, not about what's important, but our approaches to how we do our work.
So here's a thought process, or here's a thought assignment. What if instead of our mindset saying, well, they should know how to do manual budgets, what if we change it to, it's important for them to learn how to do manual budgets? If we changed the should to it's important because, will it be
Mm-hmm.
important for them to know how to do manual budgets? Would that be okay? Well, if they don't necessarily need to, or if it's not that important for them to learn it, what are some other things we can do that will be more beneficial in their training,
Mm-hmm.
their induction, right? So it's not just busy work or things that might happen once a year, right? Because those things that happen once a year, you know when we're going to learn them? When we do them the first time in 8 months or the first time in 2 years. That's when we're going to relearn them, right? So what is important to know? And are we judging people's abilities to be effective based off of what are things that are important for them to know or what we think they should know because we had to learn it, right?
Bingo.
Which which
Bingo.
which goes to us as public servants, as helping professionals in public service, right? Ethically. How often, and we've been talking about this, we've been going around this, and this totally goes hand in hand with what we've been talking about. How often do we, as case managers or people who work the front desk, answer the phones, base our reaction to other people on how we think they should be responding because that's how we would respond,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Well, they're not working. If I was out of a job, I'd find another job next week. If I couldn't
Yeah.
have formula for my daughter, I would go out and work two jobs, right? You know, my
Mhm.
dad taught me if you can't pay the rent, you're not working hard enough, even though I was working 60 hours a week, right? And so, sure, I learned that. But does that mean that I expect other people to have to work 60 hours a week, or do I think that's fair? Do I know people who are doing that and I know they're busting their tail and I get it, but do I think that that's something that everybody should have to do?
Mhm.
No, right? Yeah, I mean, we should all be paid a fair wage. We should all be able to work one job at a fair wage that allows us to, do the things that, we feel are important to us, right? And so, and that changes when you have kids. It becomes, well, I need to take care of my family. When you're a kid, I want to do fun things, right? Or, other things like that. And you have the conversation, you're doing fun things, but you know, how do we grow from this? How do we start getting into maybe some things, when you do have a family or when you want to have a family, those different things like that. That's a different conversation, right? But when we put it on how we feel about it, and then we personalize it and it becomes a judgment, it becomes right or wrong, and our brain goes to judgment, right? Oh, well, how can they have three kids and they're pregnant again? They can't even afford the three that they have. That's a judgment. Right. Well, I don't understand why they just aren't, they're not trying to find a job hard enough. Or if we just get them a job, we've got them a job. Why can't they keep a job? Well, that's something, those are all judgments, right? As opposed to, what are the things that you're finding challenging? What are the things that are hard? What are the things that you want to do? Right. I hear that all the time. Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, just get a job. It doesn't matter if it's the thing that you don't want to do. Sure. What we started the conversation today was what was the worst job that you had?
Mhm.
Right. I mean, would I wish that job on anybody? No, not unless they enjoyed it. I don't know anybody who enjoys cleaning off soot off of individual pieces of paper. I don't know anybody, but that might be somebody's dream job, right? That might be something that they love to do. I ain't gonna be mad at them about that. I get people who say, well, you chose to be a teacher, so you're, okay, well, they chose to be a teacher because they have the heart to teach other people, right? Why are you taking that so negatively? Right. And so that's the same thing that happens when we get into positions of helping others when they're having issues with managing their life, managing their family's lives. If we're not careful, we take personally. And when we take it personally, it affects the way that we interact with them. And then we're not treating them fairly, right? If I have an issue with how somebody dresses, they're sagging their pants, they're wearing their hat flat billed or to the side, right? Does that impact if there's two jobs, one for, working, fast food and one working in an office? Does that affect which job I refer to that person? Well, they're sagging their pants. They're going to walk into that interview in the office and they're not going to get the job. If you're making that judgment before having that full conversation with somebody or asking them what they're interested in doing, you're choosing that job for them, which may not be the job that they want, right? And so you
Yep.
see that. You see that in how people, when they talk to us, if we're not careful, we take those things personally and it affects how we interact with them. And that is so limiting to those people that we say we are helping. I
Mhm.
don't know. What do you think, Tiff? Spit game, Tiff. Spit. Let us know what you feel.
So I think that that was me boxing, by the way.
Yeah.
No, I do agree with you. And judgment in of itself, I think is an unethical behavior. In the big grand scheme of things. Now, first and foremost, we're all going to judge from time to time. It's part of being a human being. But staying in that space of judgment, I think, is where again, we put the me in it instead of thinking about the other person. And, um, coaching and leadership and human services, all three of those, the thing that they have in common is that they're all three in a service to others. And so when you are in service to others, you have to really take yourself out of that equation. The other thing that I find kind of ironic and interesting about this idea of us deciding what other people should be doing, uh, again, it's a very natural inclination, but where I find it really fascinating is that most of the time, the advice that we give to other people or the judgments we make about other people, we would never choose for ourselves. I'm saying that with all the love in my heart, but it's real easy to look at somebody else from a place of judgment and say, this is what you should do, this is what you need to do, this is whatever you, I'm the expert, you should do this. But if we were in that same situation, I guarantee we would probably choose something completely different than what we suggested to anyone else. I mean, we do this at work, we do this in relationships, we do this all over the place. And so I think like the most loving thing and loving wasn't part of your circles, but one of the most loving things that we can do for other people is not um, put them in a box where they have to behave in a way that we expect from them. With the exception of when you're in a leadership position, once you've drawn the box, the expectations, once you've created the guidelines, it is very important that we keep people in line with those expectations because there are going to be times where something is culturally acceptable, but in violation of the expectations. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. I was late for work for like 12 solid years. Like my nickname on these streets is Tardy Tiffany. I'm not known for my punctuality, to say the least. But with that being said, in every county that I've worked for, in every company I've worked for, when it came to like the code of ethics, when it came to like guidelines, it's always been that it's you have to be to work on time and that there's expectations around promptness and punctuality and attendance. And also with that being said, I had very few supervisors that held me accountable to that standard. And so it was not unusual for me to come in at 8:04 or 8:07 or 8:17, depending on the day, and not have any repercussions. So there's a disconnect between, again, what we put on paper and what you can do. And by the way, when I would show up on time, the four times that it happened, um, the building would be a ghost town. I wasn't the only person showing up late. It was very, very empty at start time. So one of the fun things that I think I experience now, I've changed, by the way, for all of you judging me. Don't judge me. I'm on time now. I'm even early. I'm even early. But one of the things that's most interesting for me is that there are times where, and I'm sure you experience this as well, where we're contractually obligated to show up at a certain time. Um, and one, there's one county, and I'll keep them secret, but there's a county far, far away that when I go, there's this building that one of the buildings I train in. I actually really like to be there early because I get to watch the show. These people have to turn a corner to get to the building. And when I tell you it's like the most synchronized Tokyo drift happening around this corner, just car after car after car. My classes start at 9, and I'm usually there at like 8 o'clock, 8:05, or whatever. These employees just take that corner, like it's just so fun to watch. But it's all past their start time. And so again, what it's saying is that it's culturally acceptable to show up late for work. But at some point, someone's going to be held accountable. Some leader is going to say, no, you have to be here on time. And people are going to have a hard time with that because how is it fair? I've been late for 10 years and it's never been a problem. But now it's unfair. And now you're saying, oh, well, this is the law, this is the policy, it's legal. Yes, but is it fair that I've never had this expectation before? And if we're being punitive about it, is it really effective? Because what you're probably going to see is I'm going to push back. And so, what's a different way of approaching that? I may take a different approach than just punishment, but maybe have a conversation. Maybe we're rethinking the way that we've applied the attendance policy. I know for the last 24 years, people have been able to come in, after their start time, and we have looked the other way. Effective January 1st, we are going to be more stringent and hold higher expectations around the policy. We're going to or not implement the new policy, but enforce the existing policy, which we haven't done previously. So this would be, again, I'm communicating so it doesn't feel punitive. I'm communicating. But I think too many times we don't live up to who we are on paper. And when that becomes apparent and there's some push in that direction, if the communication is not effective, then it's not going to sway people in the right way. I don't know. I'm getting real passionate here, but
Well, I'll give you an example of how that's worked with me, right? So in my in my days as line staff, I worked for an organization where if our staff meeting started at 9 and was supposed to be over by 10, people would walk in 9:05, 9:10. We'd start at 9:15.
yep,
And then,
yep.
we'd talk about stuff, we'd yuck it up, go back and forth, speak our mind, whatever. And then we'd be done 11:15, 11:20. And mind you, this was on a Friday when we're supposed to have protected time. And what happens when you get out of a meeting at 11:20? How much work gets done
You
before noon,
had the meeting after the meeting. Yeah.
right? So that wasted a whole morning of protected time, right? Where we could talk to and where we didn't have to meet with clients and actually get the paperwork done that could help facilitate that, right? So when I became supervisor, one of my first things that I did was with our staff meetings, I created agendas, right? But then I also told people when the meeting's it's at 9 o'clock, let's start at 9 o'clock. I want to honor your time and I want us to be done by 10 so that you can actually use your protected time. Right. And then I created the agendas where we had specific times for each topic. Sometimes there were 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever they were. My admin had an egg timer, and when that timer went off, this is before Obama phones, right? Smartphones. And when the egg timer went off, I said, okay, so we're gonna stop talking about this topic. Anybody else who has anything else they want to say about this, come talk to me in the office after the meeting. I'll have office hours, right, until noon if you want to come talk to me. And so I created that new expectation. We will be there at 9 o'clock. The meeting starts at 9 o'clock. And I created those timed agendas so that we were done in an hour. So it wasn't the idea of an hour long meeting. It was this meeting will be an hour long. So you created a new expectation for people to be on time and for the meetings to end when they're supposed to. And I told them why, right? I want to protect your time. I want to honor your time. If you don't, if you're not necessarily interested in some of the conversation we're having, then you don't have to be part of it. You can be out of here by 10 o'clock, go take care of that. If you have any other conversations that you want to talk about offline, come talk to me. Right. So this was actually beneficial for them. And I told them why I was doing this, and it was for their benefit. And so what do you think happened? People showed up at 9 and we were done by 10 o'clock, every staff
Mhm.
meeting. And the staff meetings were just as meaningful, just as robust, right? But people recognized that it was helpful for them. It's just like having,
Right.
regular one-on-one meetings. I had a coachee who was instituting one-on-one meetings, and he said, I created the one-on-one meetings to be an hour every other week. But the first two meetings, I didn't put a time on. Right. And he said, I just wanted them to come and check in and get used to it. He said, the first meeting lasted 2 hours. The second meeting lasted an hour and a half. And now I'm finding these meetings lasting maybe 45 minutes and they're just as meaningful because people
Hmm.
are getting used to having these meetings. And plus, they're getting shorter every time and they're more meaningful. So people are seeing the benefits in it and it's not wasting their time. Right. So creating these expectations up front, having those conversations, letting them know why, the right to ask for information. What if we give people information before they ask for it? What if we tell people the why before they ask why?
Yeah.
Right. And then allow them to ask why if the why isn't necessarily good enough for them, or to ask for more of a why. So I definitely hear. And the same thing with clients, right? Well, why do I have to do a job search? Well, because it's part of the process. And if you don't do it, then you're gonna be sanctioned. How about that? Right.
Hmm.
And as opposed to, well, the job search, why do you think a job search is effective, or why, you know, what are the things that you think, what is it that you want to do? Right.
Right.
I had a client say, I want to stay home. And I said, well,
Me
yeah, absolutely. Me too. Right. But I was asking, okay, so what is staying at home? How's that working for you? Well, it's
too.
good. I just wish I had more money. Okay. So, how could you get more money? Well, if I had a job. Okay. So how can you mix, having a job and also being there for your family? I don't know. How do you do it? Oh, you're asking me how I do it? Well, then I can tell you how I do it. Right. And I pay for childcare, but guess what? You don't have to pay for childcare. And all those things like that, where it is, what do you think having a job will do for your kids, for your family? How will that provide a benefit for them? Right. Rather than, well, you need to do this so you can be a good role model and so your kids don't see you being a deadbeat. Well, all of those words sound like judgment, don't they? Right.
They
How
are.
do you,
That's because they are.
yeah, right. Yeah. So
That's because they are.
how do you think this is helping your kids? How do you think this is going to benefit your family? Right. What are the things that, you know, working or going to school is going to do to benefit you and your family in the long run? And have that conversation. They may not have an answer right off the bat. No one's maybe have ever asked them that question. Maybe they've been told the answers to that. And how often are people not given the opportunity to think about their own answers? That's the key. That's the important piece. Right. And so when we're helping others, what's the impact? When somebody comes in and I need to see a worker now, and we immediately say, well, how rude are they? Okay, so we're making a judgment on, do they deserve my help or not? Right. If we have two people who come in and say, is there anybody who can help me? I don't have anybody, I don't have any formula to feed my daughter, and I don't know what to do. And another person, I can't feed my daughter now. Right. Well, two people with the same issue, but handle the issue differently. But in our brain, one of them deserves help quicker and with more support than the other. because our brain is sizing up safety and danger. That's personal, as opposed to why is
Leaders
this
do that
person
too.
acting out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, leaders do that too. I guarantee you, even in not in a human services perspective, leaders are doing the same thing. You know, if I have somebody who maybe asks questions every time I ask them to do something, they may be telling themselves, "Oh, this person's just difficult," or, I don't even want to answer their question because they're going to use that against me later on, and use it as a justification to behave badly versus maybe this person really just wants to know and maybe wants more detail than I like to give.
Mhm.
And it's not personal. I mean, it happens all of the time.
Yeah.
I can say that there's been times where people come and ask me questions, and I'm like thinking, do you really want to know, or are you just trying to put me in a position to not know? What's really going on here?
Mhm.
And so we may treat people very differently based on, again, what we already believe to be true about them, and that's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, I can tell you that you probably had this, Tiff, where somebody said, "What are you in a classroom? What are you going to tell me that's different than what I've learned in the last 25 years?" I've had probably 4 or 5 people in my career say that to me in the class with 30 other people looking at them like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you just said that to the teacher." Right?
Hmm. I
How
have
many
had
people?
it.
Yeah, how
I
many
don't
people?
know. I don't keep account, but I just said, uh, I'm not sure, but let's find out.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, but I mean, how many people would say, "Gosh, that's so rude," or "Why are you being so, so rude from for to that teacher, or why are you being like that? Why are you being difficult?" Well, for me, that's telling me, how are you going to make this time worthwhile?
Right.
And so for me, it's like, well, I'm not sure if I'm going to tell you anything different than what you've heard the last 25 years or what you've experienced in your career in the last 25 years. But there might be a different perspective that we get either from what I say or from somebody else in the class. So, what I would ask is if you can keep an open mind to seeing if there's something that you may haven't heard from somebody else, right?
Yeah.
And rather than, well, I don't know, you're just gonna have to find out, I guess. 'Cause I know some people who would really go there with that, right? So, it's I don't take those as challenges. I take that as intellectual challenges, right? At the end of the day, I might
Hmm.
check in. So, how did we do? Right. But I wouldn't take that as a personal insult because, I was on that other end. I was in that chair listening to somebody who I wasn't quite sure what they were telling me was meaningful or beneficial to what I
Yeah.
did. Right.
Yeah. No, I feel you. Well,
So,
that's something, yeah, I will say just as an instructor, that is something, believe it or not, that I take into consideration when I do create classes. What I am thinking about, and maybe this is the ethical part of that profession, is my question is what is going to be helpful to help them do their jobs better? What new skill do they need? What new tools do they need? What resources do they need? And that's something that I think about when I'm developing
yeah.
is number one, I don't have all of the answers for everything that they may do. And so I try to create opportunities, not just for me to teach them something, but for them to reflect on their own practices. And then the other part of like my ethical considerations as a so-called expert is that I really put a lot of effort into um, staying current with new information. And that's something that's important to me. So making sure I'm watching videos, making sure I'm listening to, podcasts, making sure that although again, I ironically don't love the podcast. I'm more of a visual person. I really prefer videos and books. Videos and books resonate with me more than just listening to people talk. And so these are things that I'm thinking about when, again, I'm in my role of instructor. Like, what is the most current? What do I need to rethink to be able to share something that's going to be meaningful? Um, because I have a responsibility for people's time. It's an investment of time, effort, and energy to come to a classroom. And so I want to make sure that there's a good return on that investment of their time, effort, and energy to walk away with something. And sometimes the something that they walk away with is just a reassurance that they're doing it right. Um, that they're already on the right path. And so I know like one of the questions I like to ask at the end of every class is what is something that you want to start, stop, or continue? That's kind of like my ask. Start, stop, or continue, something you want to start doing, something you'll stop doing, or something you're going to continue doing as a result of what you learned today. And I always love to hear the responses. And that's how I know that people are getting, uh, again, a return on the investment, right? They get to rethink their practice. And that's important to me from an ethical perspective. Because if people get nothing out of what we do, then are we giving them value for their money? And the answer is no. And we're not cheap. We're not cheap. Our podcast may be free, but but, but we're not cheap. But I want to make sure people get value for their money. That's something that's really important to me.
That being said, if anybody's interested in sponsoring, please let us know. So, you know,
Please.
we don't mind working cheap, but we'd also like to be, you know, paid our worth. So I hear you.
Yeah.
So in wrapping up our conversation about ethics, you have any questions? Do you have any tips, riffs?
Tips riffs. The question that I would ask, the first one is to do a review for whatever company or organization you work for, or if you own your own business or you have your own company, to really think about what your standards are. What is your code of ethics? What is important for your company or what is important for your organization in terms of how you want yourself and others to behave, whether it be a code of conduct, a code of ethics, but set the guidelines for what is legal, what is right, what is fair. The other thing that I would have you reconsider is to really think about, again, do you live up to who you are on paper? So again, looking at your values and looking at the things that you look for in other people. Are you modeling those same behaviors? Um, and then of course this one's come up so many different classes, but it's worth stating again, is how do we get out of judgment and really get into that space of curiosity with people from all perspectives, whether it be in human services, whether it be in coaching, whether it be in leadership, but really get beyond you and start to think about what's going on for other people and being open to those new perspectives and being genuinely interested in other people's worldview and their perspective without the judgment. Really coming from a place of gathering new information versus deciding whether somebody's wrong or right for how they think or what they believe. Those would be my questions. Don't ask me to repeat them because I can't. That's what I would be thinking about.
Absolutely. And just another way of thinking about them, what is it that you want to stand for? What are you
Mhm.
willing to stand on?
Yeah,
Right. And how do you think about how other people go about standing on those?
right.
Right.
Yeah,
So, because you got to stand on business, yo. Got to stand on business.
absolutely. And just you heard from the last one. If you're not standing on business, this is the year I'm going to call you on it. I'm just letting y'all know now.
Don't
This is
don't
the
start.
year. I'm gonna be
This is the
asking those
find out
questions.
year. This is
This is
this is
the
the
year.
find out year. Yeah.
This is the find out year. And I'm gonna find out too about me. Don't think that I'm just picking on other people. I'm gonna be highly accountable to me too. So
Very
watch
cool.
out.
Well, I
Get
hope
right, get right, or get left. That's what's gonna happen.
get busy living or get busy dying. So, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, with that being said, we are looking forward to seeing you all in this new year. So until our next episode, I'm Carl.
And I am Tiff.
And let's keep it real, real,
Keep it
real,
real.
y'all.
Ethical.
Don't
Keep it
start no
real.
stuff, won't be no stuff.
That's
So,
right. That's right.
all right.
Exactly.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.